What was meant to be a holy, joyful consecration service quickly turned into one of the most shocking church moments of the year. In front of everyone, Bishop Todd Hall suddenly stopped the entire service and delivered a rebuke so sharp it left the room frozen in silence. People were gasping, others couldn't believe what they were hearing, and now the whole church world is asking, why did Bishop Hall do it? Stay with me, because the truth behind this explosive moment will leave you absolutely speechless. Consecration services are supposed to be sacred moments, times of honor, unity, and deep reverence. It's the day when bishops are affirmed, prayed over, and officially released into their calling. But what happens when that holy atmosphere is shattered not by critics on the outside, but by a bishop standing inside the house? That's exactly what took place when Bishop Todd Hall, a man known across the nation for his fiery preaching and prophetic boldness, stopped the service. Fiery preaching and prophetic boldness stopped the service cold with an open rebuke. For those watching, it was jaw-dropping. This wasn't a quiet correction whispered behind closed doors. This was a direct, unapologetic call-out delivered in front of everyone right in the middle of a spirit-filled consecration. In today's video, we're breaking down exactly what went down that day, what led up to the service, the very words Bishop Hall spoke, and the ripple effect his rebuke created in the church world. We'll uncover why this moment struck such a nerve, what deeper issues fueled it, and why the conversation around leadership, accountability, and spiritual authority will never be the same. And trust me, you don't want to miss this, because before this video is over, I'll reveal the hidden details behind Bishop Hall's words and why his stand is still shaking the gospel community today. To truly understand the weight of Bishop Todd Hall's rebuke, you first have to grasp what a bishop's consecration means, especially in Pentecostal holiness and charismatic traditions. A consecration isn't just another church service, it is one of the highest and most sacred ceremonies in the Christian church world. It's the moment when a leader is officially recognized, affirmed, and entrusted with authority at the highest level of ministry. Every part of the service carries deep meaning. The oil poured represents divine anointing, the laying on of hands connects the candidate to generations of spiritual authority, the sacred garments symbolize responsibility and humility, and the gathered community represents accountability before God and man. In short, consecration is supposed to embody unity, holiness, and affirmation. Because of its significance, these services are carefully orchestrated and deeply respected. Leaders travel from across denominations to witness it, families pack the sanctuary to celebrate it, and the entire church body often treats it as a defining milestone, not just for the person being consecrated, but for the ministry as a whole. That's why when the sacred flow of a consecration is interrupted, it doesn't just fade away, it becomes unforgettable. It becomes part of church history. It was the same during this consecration service. The air was charged with anticipation. When a new leader was promoted to the position of bishop, the church was prepared to celebrate. Expecting a stirring and seamless ceremony, the congregation had assembled in their best clothes, the choir had performed, and the pastors had offered prayers. Everything appeared to be in place for a happy, memorable event. However, the majority of people first failed to recognize that there were tensions beneath the surface. There were rumblings that not everyone agreed with the way things were going, doubts about behavior, and worries about the procedure. When Bishop Todd Hall, seated among the leaders, determined that enough was enough, the undercurrents which may have remained hidden became unavoidable, because silence can occasionally be interpreted as assent when a consecration rite is marred by what one perceives to be disorder or misbehavior. Furthermore, Todd Hall is not the type of leader who remains mute when something contradicts his moral or biblical convictions. Bishop Todd Hall spoke up in a moment that stunned the sanctuary, since few people would dare to do so in such a prominent ceremonial setting. In the midst of the consecration, he publicly chastised him. However, what precisely took place at that precise moment? What was said by Bishop Hall, and why did it land so heavily? More significantly, what was happening in the background that made him take such a daring and dangerous risk? You might be surprised by the responses, which show much more than a passionate outburst. There was music, prayer, and a sense of anticipation in the sanctuary. The congregation had previously gone through the customary rites, scripture readings, songs, and a laying on of hands, which represented the holy transfer of spiritual authority as part of the consecration. For everyone present, everything appeared to be going as planned, but something changed in the midst of that holy rhythm. During the service, observers remembered instances where specific gestures, words, and behaviors did not fit the mood of the event. Some characterized it as a lack of respect, while others said that what ought to have been a sacred moment was being tainted by vanity and self-aggrandizement. Bishop Todd Hall didn't like it, whatever it was. Bishop Hall, who is well known for his ferocious sermons and audacious prophetic position, is not one to downplay what he perceives to be wrong, particularly in God's home. And he decided then and there that he could not remain silent any longer. Without initially even requiring a microphone, he stood up and demanded attention. His tone was plainly forceful, and his remarks, which demanded holiness, order, and respect for the sacredness of the office of bishop, pierced the festive atmosphere. Depending on who was there, different people have given different versions of his rebuke, but the main idea was always the same. Bishop Hall was addressing what he saw as improper behavior, a misdirected attention, or acts that did not demonstrate the seriousness of consecration. It was more than a small fix. It was a scathing, unrepentant, and unavoidable public censure. The room went cold. Applause and music had filled the previous moments, but now there was silence, and all eyes were on Bishop Hall. The jolt reverberated throughout the sanctuary. Some glanced down, some looked at each other uneasily, and some nodded silently, as if they agreed that someone had to say it. The consecrated candidate was clearly shaken and confused of how to respond. The tension was evident despite the efforts of other bishops and officials on the stage to remain calm. According to several, the entire ceremony seemed to change at that point, with the joyous atmosphere clashing with a somber reality of responsibility. The congregation was torn between feeling awed and uneasy. A lot of people had never witnessed a prominent leader reprimand someone during a consecration ritual before. It had never been done before. Was this heavenly correction or a disturbance? Responses differed. In private, others praised Bishop Hall, stating that his bravery served as a much-needed reminder that consecration is about holiness rather than showbiz. However, some said the reprimand was too severe, too widely known, and ran the risk of making the candidate look foolish in front of the entire church. No matter where individuals stood, one thing was obvious. No one would ever remember the occasion as just another consecration. One of the most audacious public censures in the church's recent history now distinguished it. The problem is that this was more than simply one individual voicing his opinions during a heated exchange. Deeper problems were simmering in the background, worries that had been whispering for a long time before the service started. Bishop Hall's reprimand was merely the spark that let the light shine through. But what were those more fundamental problems? And why did Bishop Hall feel the need to confront them in front of everyone right then and there? The backstory has the answers, the tense situations, the disputes, and the leadership issues that preceded this cataclysmic event. Bishop Todd Hall's chastisement would have looked abrupt, even surprising, to the typical churchgoer at that consecration event. However, it wasn't totally unexpected to people who know how leadership circles operate. The consecration had already been the subject of silent rumors, unsaid conflicts, and unanswered questions behind the gleaming robes and official titles. You see, prayer, discernment, and accountability are supposed to be at the heart of the ordination process. It should not be taken lightly, and it should not be sought for selfish, power-hungry, or prestigious reasons. However, the handling of consecrations has come under increasing criticism in the church community in recent years. Some leaders have charged that others utilize the sacred office for influence rather than service, seeing as a status symbol. And some of the same worries were present in this consecration. According to reports, concerns had previously been expressed on the consecrated candidate's suitability for the position. Some detractors believed that the procedure had been hurried and lacked adequate spiritual or vetting preparation. Others cited actions that, in their opinion, did not demonstrate the maturity and humility expected of a bishop. These undercurrents couldn't be disregarded by Bishop Todd Hall, who has always been vocal about upholding integrity in ministry. He's earned a reputation for holding the church accountable in addition to his forceful sermons. He saw it as equivalent to approving something he felt was spiritually improper for a consecration to take place without resolving the issues. Conversations had previously been taking place behind closed doors. According to reports, several leaders agreed with Bishop Hall's worries but decided to keep quiet to maintain unity and prevent public humiliation. However, as Bishop Hall has frequently stated in previous lectures, unity without truth is not truly unity. The tension was like a thundercloud hanging over the party. By the time the consecration ritual came, the leaders on the podium were aware of its presence, even though the majority of the congregation might not have spotted it. And Bishop Hall wasn't merely responding to a moment when he eventually got up and spoke. He was dealing with a problem that had been simmering for weeks, months perhaps. Back then, the criticism was directed at more than one service or candidate. Bishop Hall saw it as a direct challenge to the culture of compromise that was permeating church leadership. He wished to emphasize that consecration is a commitment before God, not a showy ritual. At this point, the situation becomes even more intriguing. His statements were interpreted as prophetic by some, harsh by others, and a much-needed correction at a time when the church is in danger of losing its credibility as a result of unbridled ambition and dubious leadership practices. Public reprimands, of course, ambition and dubious leadership practices. Public reprimands, of course, are seldom without repercussions. The consequences of that instance started almost immediately. Social media posts went viral, phone calls were placed, and discussions broke out in both public and private settings. While some commended Bishop Hall for his bravery, others chastised him for interfering with what ought to have been a solemn and unifying event. And that begs the crucial question: what was the fallout exactly? What impact did this event have on Bishop Hall, the church, and the candidate? The atmosphere in the sanctuary immediately changed as Bishop Todd Hall gave his censure. A strained, tense atmosphere replaced what had started out as a ceremonial service full of celebration and expectation. Many in attendance were left wondering what they had just seen as their eyes opened and whispers echoed across the audience. The impact was instantaneous and quite personal for the person being consecrated. According to reports, there was apparent astonishment and apprehension, as though the burden of the position now carried an extra degree of scrutiny. Everyone was filled with questions. Was the reprimand warranted? Was it a personal challenge or a correction of prophecy? And above all, what impact would this event have on the candidate's future as bishops? There was a wide range of responses from the other leaders in attendance. Bishop Hall's bravery was applauded by some, who saw it as a daring declaration of holiness and accountability. They realized that integrity and devotion to God's purpose, rather than pomp and circumstance, are the hallmarks of true spiritual power. Hall's criticism served as a wake-up call for these leaders, reminding them that spiritual leadership must always be based on principles rather than politics. Others, on the other hand, disagreed, believing the reprimand's public character was improper. They maintained that, in order to maintain the consecration's dignity and prevent congregational division, such issues ought to have been discussed in secret. These critics were concerned that making such tensions public may lead to long-lasting conflicts and possibly harm the church's and its leaders' reputations. Then there was the wider group, which included churchgoers, followers, and members who watched online or at home. Social media quickly became a forum for discussions and ideas. Videos of the reprimand quickly went viral, igniting contentious debates on several sites. As individuals discussed the propriety, importance, and ramifications of Bishop Hall's conduct, hashtags related to the incident were popular both inside and outside of church circles. Others praised his courage, saying that it was uncommon to witness a leader who was prepared to openly point out perceived mistakes in a place of worship. Many commented that his acts reminded the church of its sacred duties and emphasized the value of accountability. However, others chastised him for allegedly interfering with a religious ritual, claiming that it distracted from the candidate's accomplishment and overshadowed the consecration's goal. However, the impact didn't end there. The story was picked up by news organizations and blogs devoted to churches, who presented it as a major dispute within the religious community. Articles examined all aspects, including the interpersonal dynamics and theological ramifications. There were concerns raised regarding whether this reprimand was a sign of more serious problems with church leadership, worries about accountability, openness, and striking a balance between power and modesty. Leaders apparently rushed behind the scenes to control the fallout. As the community attempted to manage the stress, private discussions, emergency sessions, and talks with high church officials were held. While some attempted to arbitrate between the two viewpoints, others defended Bishop Hall, while still others aimed to support the nominee. Nevertheless, one indisputable fact surfaced in spite of the close examination and divergent viewpoints. Bishop Todd Hall examination and divergent viewpoints. Bishop Todd Hall's actions made it impossible to ignore the topic. It called into question leadership presumptions, pushed back against complacency, and brought attention. Presumptions pushed back against complacency and brought attention to the occasionally awkward relationship between accountability, authority, and public opinion. This is the startling element, though, that most people are unaware of. The reprimand was not limited to the consecration day. Weeks and months later, its effects were still being felt, impacting community trust, leadership choices, and even the handling of subsequent consecrations. This one instance, in many respects, turned the tide for the candidate and the larger religious community. Others viewed it as a much-needed wake-up call, a reminder that genuine spiritual power isn't about formality, titles, or appearances, while others dreaded separation. It involves living and leading with honesty, bravery, and responsibility. Long after the concept, honesty, bravery, and responsibility. Long after the consecration service was over, the impact of Bishop Todd Hall's scolding persisted, even though the immediate shock of it took over headlines and social media feeds. Over time, what many at first saw as a tremendous disruption came to be seen as a turning point that called into question the church's accountability and leadership culture. First, the accountability and leadership culture. First, there was a noticeable change in the way leadership ceremonies and consecrations were handled. Senior executives started enforcing more stringent procedures that prioritized openness, careful screening, and candidate spiritual preparedness. Previously disregarded issues of character, readiness, and humility become crucial to the process. Bishop Hall's actions provoked candid discussions about striking a balance between upholding tradition and guaranteeing genuine integrity and leadership in several congregations. However, the reprimand also sparked more extensive conversations about responsibility. Churchgoers started to inquire more deeply about the qualifications of their leaders, the selection procedures, and the function of supervision in the ministry. Bishop Hall's audacious action demonstrated that upholding the community's spiritual well-being requires expressing the truth, even when doing so causes discomfort. His example encouraged ordinary leaders as well as clergy to push for accountability and openness in their churches. The repercussions went beyond rules and regulations. It served as a spiritual reminder to the community that godly leadership is not measured by titles and rituals. Scripture alignment, service and humility, and a dedication to holiness are the foundations of true authority. In essence, Bishop Hall's censure was an appeal to the entire church. Ritual should never take precedence over righteousness. This incident strengthened Bishop Todd Hall's standing as a fearless and morally upright leader. Many understood that boldness frequently entails controversy, even while some chastised him for the timing or public nature of his criticism. His readiness to confront challenging realities head-on showed a degree of honesty and responsibility that made an impression on both clergy and members of the congregation. Additionally, the encounter turned into a teaching moment for both the congregation and the candidate. It served as a reminder that being a leader entails a great deal of responsibility, and that challenge, correction, and introspection are frequently the paths to growth. In retrospect, the scolding was a pivotal teaching moment that would influence their ministry for years to come, even if some originally saw it as a defeat. Bishop Hall's actions provoked discussions about leadership standards among many denominations in the wider community. Churches started debating how to manage wrongdoing or blunders, how to strike a balance between grace and accountability, and how to make sure that holy rituals honor God's will rather than selfish goals. Questions concerning prophetic power, the boundaries of public chastisement, and the duties of leaders to God and their congregation reverberated in church forums and social media discussions. In the end, this consecration event will be remembered for the brave intervention that served as a reminder to everyone that holiness cannot be compromised, not just for the ceremony itself. Bishop Todd Hall's reprimand turned into a turning point, a display of honesty, bravery, and the harsh reality that spiritual leadership is never optional. When we think back on this tale, it becomes evident why it has struck such a deep chord. It's not just about one church, one individual, or one incident. It has to do with the fundamental ideas that guide all ministry. Integrity, bravery, modesty, and the readiness to speak the truth even when it causes discomfort. Bishop Hall's deeds serve as a reminder that being a leader involves more than simply pomp and circumstance. It's about serving God and His people faithfully with openness, conviction, and unflinching honesty. This will therefore be a benchmark and a reminder that true leadership is measured by courage rather than comfort the next time a consecration service is held or a leader assumes a position of responsibility. Additionally, walking in God assumes a position of responsibility. Additionally, walking in God's calling requires accountability, even when it hurts.